The river was calm that morning, the kind of peaceful stillness that made it seem harmless. Birds chirped from the treetops, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the air. But within seconds, the tranquility shattered. A desperate cry cut through the morning haze. A child's voice, panicked and struggling. The boy's small hands flailed in the water, his face barely breaking the surface before being pulled under again. No one else was around, no one to hear, no one to help, except for her. Awa was on her way back from the market, a basket balanced on her hip, when she saw the boy. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, but then she saw the terror on his tiny face. Without a second thought, she dropped everything and ran toward the riverbank. She was not young, nor was she a strong swimmer, but hesitation was not an option. The boy was drowning. The water was ice cold as she plunged in, her heart racing. She fought against the current, her arms pushing through the heavy water, reaching, stretching. Every second mattered. The boy's head dipped beneath the surface again, and for one terrifying moment, she feared she was too late. But then her fingers brushed against his arm. With one final push, she grabbed hold and pulled him close, wrapping him against her chest. The struggle back to shore felt endless, but Awa refused to let go. By the time her feet touched the muddy riverbed, her legs were weak, her breath short, but the boy was alive. He coughed violently, his tiny body shivering against hers, but he was safe. She held him for a moment, whispering soft reassurances as he clung to her, before finally lifting him into her arms. That boy's name was Malik. For days after the incident, he wouldn't leave Oa's side. He had no mother, no father, only a distant uncle who barely acknowledged his existence. But with Oa, he found warmth, safety, something he had never truly known before. She didn't have much, but what little she had, she shared with him. A warm meal, a place to sleep, a gentle hand on his back when nightmares woke him in the middle of the night. Time passed, and eventually Malik had to leave. An organization had come to the village, offering him a place in a school far away. Owa knew it was an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss, even though it broke her heart to see him go. She stood at the edge of the village, watching as the small boy she had pulled from the river disappeared down the dusty road. Years went by. The world moved forward. Malik became nothing more than a memory, a story she told the younger children when they played by the river. Awa continued her life as she always had, waking before the sun, tending to the fields, selling goods at the market. The village changed, but in many ways, it remained the same. Life was not easy, but she made peace with the simple rhythm of it. What she didn't know was that far away, in a world she had never imagined, Malik had not forgotten her. The boy she had saved had grown into a man, one who had faced struggle, hardship, and adversity. But against all odds, he had built something extraordinary. Through determination, intelligence, and relentless effort, Malik had carved his way into the world of business, and he had flourished. Years passed before he was finally able to return. This time, he was not the scared boy gasping for air in the river. He was a man who had come back with a purpose. And as he stepped onto the familiar dirt path that led into the village, his heart pounded with anticipation. Would she remember him? Would she still be there? The village was just as he remembered, small, quiet, unchanged by time. His eyes scanned the familiar faces, searching for the woman who had once saved him, the one who had given him more than just his life back. And then he saw her. Awa was older now, her face lined with years of hard work, but her presence was just as strong as he remembered. She stood outside her small home, wiping her hands on her apron, watching him curiously as he approached. For a moment, Malik hesitated. How did one repay a debt that could never truly be repaid? How did one express gratitude for a second chance at life? Awa frowned slightly, tilting her head. "Can I help you, young man?" she asked, her voice warm but cautious. Malik swallowed the lump in his throat. "It's me," he said softly. "It's Malik." Her eyes widened, the basket in her hands slipping to the ground. And that was just the beginning. For a lone moment, Awa just stared, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to pull the pieces of the past together. The little boy she had once held in her arms, the child who had clung to her so many years ago, was now standing before her as a man. He was taller than she had ever imagined he would be, dressed in fine clothes that didn't belong in their small village. His voice was deeper, his features sharper, but there was something in his eyes, something familiar. And then recognition dawned. Malik. Her voice was barely above a whisper, disbelief laced in every syllable. She stepped forward slowly, almost hesitantly, as if afraid he might disappear if she blinked too fast. "Is it really you?" A smile tugged at the corners of Malik's lips, and in that instant, the years melted away. "It's me, Mama Owa," he said, using the name he had called her as a child. The name he had never forgotten. Owa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as emotions overwhelmed her. Before she knew it, she was pulling him into a tight embrace, her arms wrapped around him, just as they had been that day by the river. She felt his strong frame beneath her hands, the steady rhythm of his breath, and she knew this was real. Her boy had come home. Villagers nearby had begun to take notice. Whispers rippled through the small crowd that had gathered, eyes filled with curiosity and wonder. Who was this man? Why had he come back? The last they had seen of Malik, he had been just a boy, leaving with nothing but the clothes on his back and a future uncertain. Now he returned looking like someone out of another world. As the embrace ended, Awa stepped back, holding his face in her worn hands, studying him as if memorizing every new detail. "Look at you," she murmured. "You've grown into such a fine man." Malik chuckled softly. "I had a good start," he said, glancing around the village. "Because of you." Tears welled in Oa's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, clearing her throat. "Come inside," she said, her voice still shaky with emotion. "You must be tired. Have you eaten?" Malik smiled at her motherly instinct. It hadn't changed, not even after all these years. "I would love to share a meal with you." As they entered her small home, the murmurs outside grew louder. The people of the village were filled with questions. Some recognized Malik now, their memories slowly catching up. Others simply watched in awe, wondering what had brought him back after so many years. Inside, the house was just as Malik remembered, modest but filled with warmth. The scent of spices lingered in the air, and a small wooden table sat in the corner, the same one he had eaten at as a child. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. Awa busied herself preparing food, her hands moving out of habit, though every few moments she would glance at Malik, as if still trying to believe he was really there. "Tell me, child," she finally said. "Where have you been all these years? What has life given you?" Malik exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "Life has taken me far from here," he admitted. "Further than I ever imagined." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "After I left the village, I went to the city. The school they sent me to was nothing like I had known before. Everything was fast, loud, different. At first, it was hard. I missed home. I missed you." Awe listened intently, her eyes never leaving him. "But I worked hard," Malik continued. "I studied day and night. I knew I had been given a chance that not many get, and I wasn't going to waste it. There were days I felt lost, days I wanted to give up, but I kept going." His voice softened. "Because I remembered you. I remembered how you saved me, how you gave me a second chance at life. I wanted to make you proud." Awe swallowed the lump in her throat, her heart swelling with pride. "You were always a strong boy," she said gently. "I knew you would find your way." Malik smiled, but there was something else in his expression, something unspoken. Owan noticed it immediately. "And yet you didn't come back all these years," she said, not accusingly, but with curiosity. Malik sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wanted to," he admitted, "but I kept thinking, what if I wasn't ready? What if I hadn't done enough? I wanted to come back when I could give you more than just words." Awa frowned slightly. "Give me more." Malik met her gaze, determination in his eyes. "Mama Awa, you gave me everything when I had nothing. You saved my life. You gave me a home. You gave me love. And now I want to do the same for you." Awa's brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. "Child, what are you saying?" Malik reached into his pocket, pulling out a small piece of paper and placing it on the table between them. "I came back because I want to change your life the way you changed mine," he said softly. Awa hesitated before picking up the paper. As her eyes scanned the words, her hands began to tremble. The weight of what she was reading, what it meant, it was almost too much to process. She looked up at Malik, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is this real?" Malik nodded. "It's real." Awa's breath caught in her throat. She had spent her entire life giving to others, never expecting anything in return. And now the boy she had saved all those years ago had come back, not just to thank her, but to change her life forever. But what exactly had he done? And how would Awa's life never be the same again? Awa's hands trembled as she held the piece of paper, her eyes scanning the words over and over, as if trying to make sense of them. It wasn't just a simple letter or a kind gesture. It was something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. The numbers, the legal terms, the official-looking stamp at the bottom. It all felt overwhelming. She looked up at Malik, her voice barely steady. "I don't understand. What does this mean?" Malik leaned forward, his expression calm but filled with emotion. "It means that from this day forward, you will never have to struggle again," he said softly. "I've arranged for everything. A new home, financial security, whatever you need." His voice grew even more earnest. "Mama Awa, this is my way of repaying you for what you did for me." Awa shook her head slowly, disbelief still written across her face. "But I never asked for anything in return," she whispered. "I saved you because it was the right thing to do, because you were just a child." Malik reached for her hands, gently squeezing them. "And that's exactly why I'm doing this," he said. "You changed my life without expecting anything. Now I have the chance to do the same for you." Awa's heart swelled with emotions too complicated to name. Gratitude, pride, but also a strange kind of fear. She had lived her whole life in this village, in this tiny home. Could she really leave it all behind? And what would the others think? Outside, the whispers had turned into full conversations. Word of Malik's return had spread like wildfire, and everyone was eager to know why he had come back. Some remembered him as the quiet, orphaned boy who had been saved by Awa. Others barely recognized him at all. But one thing was clear, his return had stirred something in the village. Among those watching closely was Bubakar, the village elder. He had seen many people leave over the years, seeking better lives in the city, but very few ever returned. And none had returned quite like this. He had known Awa for decades, had seen the way she had raised Malik like her own. Now seeing this man in fine clothes, offering her something beyond their understanding, left him with questions he couldn't ignore. Later that evening, as the village gathered around the small fire in the center of the community, Bubakar finally spoke. Awa, he said, his deep voice commanding attention. The boy you saved has returned as a man, and he comes with gifts beyond what we know. His eyes shifted to Malik. But tell me, child, what is it you truly seek? Malik met the elder's gaze with quiet confidence. Nothing, elder, he said. I have already received more than I could have ever asked for. I only wish to give back to the woman who gave me everything. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some were in awe, touched by the depth of his gratitude. Others, however, were skeptical. Wealth was not something they were used to, and the idea of one of their own returning with so much power unsettled them. One voice cut through the whispers. It was Issa, a man around Malik's age, someone he had played with as a child. But time had changed him. His eyes now held something different. So you left us behind, made a fortune, and now you return as a hero? He asked, his tone laced with something Malik couldn't quite place. What do you know of our struggles now? Allah frowned at Isa's words, but Malik remained calm. I know more than you think, he replied. I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it's like to struggle, to wonder where your next meal will come from. I haven't forgotten where I came from. His voice softened. That's why I came back. Issa scoffed, crossing his arms. And what? You think money can fix everything? Silence followed. The tension in the air was thick. Malik knew this was more than just Issa's doubts. There was pain behind his words. Maybe he had hoped for his own way out, a chance Malik had gotten, but he hadn't. Awa, sensing the weight of the moment, spoke up. Malik has returned not as a stranger, but as family, she said firmly. Whatever blessings he brings, we should receive them with open hearts. Boubacar studied Malik for a long moment before nodding. Then let us see what the future holds. The conversation ended, but Malik knew the real challenge was only beginning. He had come back to honor Awa, to give her the life she deserved. But could he truly reconnect with the place he had left behind? And more importantly, would the village accept him now that he had returned as a different man? As the fire crackled and the night stretched on, Malik looked around at the faces before him. The village that had once been his entire world now felt unfamiliar. And yet, deep in his heart, he knew one thing for certain. His journey wasn't over yet. Malik lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of the small house he had once called home. The familiar scent of burning wood and damp earth filled the air, a stark contrast to the polished, air-conditioned spaces he had grown used to. Yet despite the comfort he could now afford, something about being here again made his chest tighten. He had come back to honor Awa, to give her the life she deserved, but he hadn't expected the mixed reactions from the villagers. Their doubts, their lingering questions. It was clear that not everyone welcomed his return. Awa sat quietly in the corner, her hands gently folded in her lap. She had noticed the way Malik had retreated into his thoughts after the gathering. She knew that look, the same one he had as a boy when he felt lost and unsure. You're troubled, she said softly. Malik exhaled, rubbing his temples. I didn't expect them to doubt me, he admitted. I thought they would be happy. Awa smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. Happiness and trust are not the same, my son. You left as a boy and returned as a man they do not know. Some may wonder if you remember them, if you understand their lives anymore. Her words stung because, deep down, Malik knew there was truth in them. He had worked tirelessly to build a life of success, but in doing so, he had drifted further away from the world that had raised him. Could he blame them for questioning his intentions? The next morning, Malik walked through the village, trying to reconnect with the place he had once roamed freely as a child. He saw the same narrow pathways, the same mud brick houses, but he also saw the struggles he had been shielded from as a boy. Mothers fetching water from wells that barely held enough. Children running barefoot over cracked earth, their laughter masking the hunger in their bellies. Men sitting in the shade, their conversations laced with quiet frustration over lost opportunities. Then he spotted Isa. He was helping a group of young boys fix a broken fishing net near the river, his movements precise and steady. The same river where Malik had almost lost his life. The same river where Oa had saved him all those years ago. Issa glanced up and saw Malik watching. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Issa stood and walked over, wiping his hands on his worn-out shirt. Still thinking of saving us all, he asked, his tone unreadable. Malik met his gaze. Not saving. Helping, he corrected. There's a difference. Issa scoffed. And what makes you think we need your help? Malik gestured toward the village behind them. Because I see what's happening here. The struggles, the hardships. I know things could be better. Issa crossed his arms. And yet you left. You only came back when it was convenient. Malik clenched his jaw. I didn't choose to leave, Issa. I was a child. I had no control over what happened to me. Issa's expression faltered for a brief moment before hardening again. And now that you have control, what do you plan to do with it? Throw money at our problems and hope they disappear. Malik took a step closer. I want to invest in this village. Not just handouts, real change. Education, clean water, jobs. Things that will last. His voice was steady, filled with conviction. I don't just want to help Oa. I want to help everyone. Issa studied him, as if trying to decide whether he was sincere. The tension between them was thick, the weight of years unspoken pressing down. Then Issa shook his head and turned away. People don't just change overnight, Malik, he muttered. And neither do villages. Malik watched him go, frustration bubbling in his chest. He had come here with the best intentions, but was that enough? That evening, he gathered the village elders once more. He presented his plans, building a school, repairing the wells, starting trade programs that would create jobs. But as he spoke, he could see hesitation in their eyes. Some were hopeful, but others were skeptical. Boubacar, the elder who had questioned him before, finally spoke. These are grand ideas, Malik, but we have heard promises before. Malik nodded, expected this resistance. Then let me prove it to you, he said. Let me start with one thing. One project. If I fail, I'll leave. But if it works, then maybe we can do more. The elders exchanged glances, weighing his words. Finally, Boubacar nodded. Very well. We will see if your intentions are true. Malik felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't complete acceptance, but it was a start. Later that night, as Awa prepared tea over the fire, she watched Malik closely. You always were stubborn, she said with a small smile. Malik chuckled. I had a good teacher. But as the night stretched on, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. He had set his plans in motion, but would the village truly accept his help? And more importantly, could he prove to them, and to himself, that he still belonged here? The answers wouldn't come easily, and the biggest challenge was yet to come. The following days were filled with work. Malik poured his energy into proving himself to the village, starting with the school project. He brought in engineers, local workers, and supplies, making sure that everything was done with care and respect for the community. Little by little, the people began to see that his promises weren't empty. Some of the elders still watched him with cautious eyes, but there was a shift. Conversations grew warmer, smiles lingered longer. It felt like progress. Then just as things seemed to be turning in his favor, everything took an unexpected turn. One evening, as Malik was walking back from the construction site, he saw a group of villagers gathered near Owa's home. Their voices were hushed, their expressions tense. His stomach tightened as he pushed through the crowd. Awa sat on a wooden stool outside, her face unusually pale, her hands trembling slightly as she held a letter. "Awa, what's wrong?" Malik asked, kneeling beside her. She looked at him with troubled eyes and handed him the letter. "It's from the land authorities," she murmured. Malik's heart pounded as he unfolded the paper. The words blurred together for a moment before the message became painfully clear. The village land had been sold. Someone had filed legal claims, and in a matter of weeks, the people would be forced to leave. "How is this possible?" Malik asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "Who would do this?" Bubakar stepped forward, his face heavy with concern. "It is not the first time outsiders have tried to take what is ours," he said. "But this time they have legal documents. If what they say is true, we will lose everything." Malik's hands clenched the letter. "This can't be legal," he muttered. "Who filed this claim?" Paul's voice was quiet but firm. "Issa's uncle." Malik's head snapped up. "What?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Issa stood at the back, his face unreadable. Malik pushed through the villagers and stopped in front of him. "Tell me this isn't true," he demanded. Issa exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't know," he said. "Not at first." Malik stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. "Then what do you know?" Issa hesitated before answering. "My uncle has been working with businessmen from the city. They promised him money, enough to change his life. He signed over the land rights." A wave of anger crashed over Malik. "Did you try to stop him?" Issa's jaw tightened. "I didn't find out until it was too late." The villagers erupted in whispers, panic rising among them. Malik turned to Awa, his mind racing. "We can fight this," he said. "I have lawyers, connections. We can stop them." Awa's eyes were filled with sadness. "It will not be easy," she said. "And time is against us." Malik knew she was right. The legal system was slow, and the people who had orchestrated this had likely covered their tracks well. But he had come too far to let everything be taken away now. That night, Malik sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He had thought coming back was about honoring Awa, about repaying the debt he owed her. But now it was bigger than that. This was about justice, about protecting the people who had once protected him. As the fire crackled, he made a decision. He wasn't just going to fight this, he was going to win. But he would need help, and he had a feeling that not everyone in the village was ready to trust him yet. The battle was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. Malik wasted no time. The next morning, he made urgent calls to his legal team in the city, explaining the situation and demanding answers. He needed proof that the sale had been done illegally, something that could overturn the decision before it was too late. But time was running out. The eviction notice gave the villagers only a few weeks before they would be forced to leave the land their families had lived on for generations. Meanwhile, tensions in the village were rising. Some people blamed Isa, others felt hopeless, and many still didn't fully trust Malik's intentions. Even Awa, despite her faith in him, worried that he was fighting a battle that could not be won. Malik knew he had to act fast, not just to stop the eviction, but to unite the village before fear and doubt tore them apart. Days later, a breakthrough came. One of Malik's lawyers uncovered a critical flaw in the land sale. The contract had been signed using fraudulent documents, fake signatures, altered records. It was enough to challenge the sale in court, but that process could take months, maybe years. They needed another way to stop the eviction immediately. Malik realized that if legal action wasn't fast enough, he had to go straight to the source, the businessman who had bought the land. He traveled back to the city, using his connections to set up a meeting. Sitting across from the wealthy investors who had orchestrated the entire scheme, he didn't beg or threaten. Instead, he made them an offer they couldn't ignore. "I know why you want the land," Malik said, his voice calm but firm. "It's not just for development. You need it for a major infrastructure project, and you need the village's cooperation. If this eviction goes through, you'll have a public fight on your hands. The media, the courts, it will cost you time and money. I can make that problem disappear." The investors exchanged wary glances. "And what do you want in return?" one of them asked. Malik leaned forward. "Simple. Return the land to the village. In exchange, I'll help you secure legal agreements with the villagers for your project. Fair deals, no tricks. You won't own the land, but you'll get what you need without a scandal." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the businessmen smirked. "You think you can negotiate with us? You're just a—" "I'm the only one standing between you and a disaster," Malik interrupted. "And I'm not leaving without an answer." The room fell silent again, but Malik could see the hesitation in their eyes. They knew he was right. If they pushed forward, it would turn into a legal battle they might not win. Eventually, one of them sighed. "Fine," he said, "but we expect you to keep your end of the deal." Malik didn't waste time celebrating. He immediately contacted his legal team to finalize the agreement, making sure everything was set in writing before the investors could change their minds. Then he returned to the village, carrying news that no one had expected. The land was safe. The people could stay. At first, there was silence. No one could believe it. Then cheers erupted. Children ran through the village, shouting the news. The elders, who had feared losing everything, wiped tears from their eyes. Awa simply looked at Malik, pride and gratitude shining in her expression. But the biggest surprise came when Issa approached Malik later that evening. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I doubted you. I thought you were just another outsider trying to fix things your way. But you fought for us like one of us." Malik smiled. "That's because I am one of you," he said. The village came together that night, celebrating not just their victory, but their unity. Malik knew his journey had come full circle. He had returned to repay a debt to Owa, but in the end, he had gained something even greater, a place to truly call home. As the celebration carried on through the night, Malik found himself standing near the old tree at the center of the village, watching the people he had fought for. He saw children laughing, elders embracing, and families relieved that they would not have to leave the only home they had ever known. The warmth of the firelight flickered across their faces, and for the first time in a long while, the village felt at peace. Awa approached him quietly, holding a small wooden carving in her hands. It was a beautifully crafted figure of a young boy standing beside an older woman, Malik and her. She placed it in his hands and looked at him with the same kindness she had shown all those years ago when she pulled him from the river. "This is for you," she said softly, "so you never forget where you came from." Malik smiled, running his fingers over the smooth wood. "I could never forget," he said. "This place made me who I am." The next few days were filled with rebuilding, both in spirit and in reality. Malik kept his promise to the investors and helped the village negotiate fair agreements, ensuring they had a say in how the land would be used. Instead of losing everything, they would now benefit from the project, gaining jobs, education, and resources to improve their way of life while still keeping their land. Issa, once filled with doubt and resentment, took on a leadership role in helping the community adapt to the changes. The two men, once at odds, found themselves working side by side, proving that even old wounds could heal when people came together for a common purpose. Malik stayed for a while, making sure everything was set in motion before returning to the city. But as he packed his bags, he felt something deep inside him shift. The life he had built in the business world no longer felt as fulfilling as it once had. His success, his wealth, none of it compared to the purpose he had found in reconnecting with his roots. On his last night in the village, Alla sat with him outside her home, watching the stars. "Are you sure you have to go?" she asked. Malik sighed. "For now," he said, "but this isn't goodbye. I want to do more. Not just for this village, but for others like it." Owa nodded knowingly. "Then go and do good, my son. But always remember, no matter how far you travel, you will always have a home here." The next morning Malik left, but his journey was far from over. Inspired by everything he had experienced, he shifted his focus from business to philanthropy. He used his wealth to create programs that supported rural communities, ensuring they had access to education, healthcare, and opportunities for growth without the threat of losing their homes. Years later, he returned to the village, not as a visitor, but as a true member of the community. He had built schools, created businesses that empowered the people, and ensured that no child would ever have to struggle the way he once had. As he walked through the village, now thriving with new opportunities, he saw Awa sitting outside her home, her eyes filled with pride. Malik knelt before her, just as he had when he first returned, and took her hands in his. "Everything I have done, everything I have become, is because of you," he said. "You saved my life once, and I will spend the rest of mine making sure your kindness was never in vain." Oa smiled, squeezing his hands. "It was never about repaying me, my son. It was always about what was in your heart." Malik looked around at the place that had given him so much, the place he had once feared he had lost. He had returned seeking to repay a debt, but in the end, he had found something even greater: a true purpose, a family, and a legacy that would last for generations.